Start where you're at. If you have one pasture and there's two water sources, turn a water source on. If you have two pastures, put all your livestock in one of those. Start where you're at and work from there.
In this episode of Voices from the Field, NCAT Sustainable Agriculture Specialist Darron Gaus joins Peggy Sechrist, a pioneer in the organic beef industry in Texas and a longtime Holistic Management International educator. Today's conversation is between Peggy and Jenny Pluhar, the Executive Director of the Texas Grazing Land Coalition and ranch manager for Taylor Ranches in the panhandle of Texas. Let's listen.
Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Voices from the Field. My name is Darron Gaus, and I'm a Sustainable Ag Specialist with NCAT based remotely in Victoria, Texas. I'm joined today with Peggy Sechrist, a pioneer in organic beef in Texas and a longtime HMI educator, who also co-leads with myself a working group in Texas for our Soil for Water Southern SARE project. In that project, we have been having some great conversations with a four-state team of producers, scientists, and universities, trying to key in on some of the barriers to higher rates of adoption of regenerative grazing methods. Today, we're going to hear Peggy talk with Jenny Pluhar, Executive Director at the Texas Grazing Land Coalition and ranch manager for Taylor Ranches in the Panhandle of Texas, and co-author of the book Texas Range Plants. We are most excited to hear about her work with the Texas Grazing Land Coalition and the new project they are working on called Principles Before Practices. Peggy and Jenny, welcome.
Thank you, Darron. And thank you, Jenny, for joining us today. For someone as busy and on the go as you are, we're really happy we get a few minutes with you. And I really just kind of want to open up and start and ask you to tell us a little bit about the Texas Grazing Land Coalition. So who you are and what do you do?
The Texas Grazing Land Coalition is a 501c3 organization. It is part of the National Grazing Land Coalition. NatGLC, as we call it, was formed when in the late 80s and early 90s, the Conservation Reserve Program came into being. NRCS was planting highly erodible crop, cost sharing to plant highly erodible cropland into permanent grass.
I remember that,
Well, at that time, they shifted all their personnel to that project, which was more agronomy, including all of their rangeland technical assistance personnel. And ranchers across the West predominantly were very concerned about that. They were losing their technical assistance.
Mm-hmm.
So they came together, they had several large working group meetings and formed National Grazing Land Coalition. It passed Congress and it was never funded. So in the different states adopted it and picked it up and handle it different ways. I think there's one state where they get a slice of the license plate fees.
All right.
I mean, all kinds of odd ways,
interesting,
different
creative
ways.
Funding.
Right, we do. We seek a lot of grant funding. In Texas, the Natural Resources Conservation Service is very supportive, and we have a working agreement with them to provide technical assistance and education and outreach and all of those sorts of things. I mean, our vision is good stewardship evident on rangelands across Texas.
Right.
And to do that, we use partnerships, technical assistance, outreach, education, training, of a large variety of things. We have 11 regional coalitions across Texas. We'd like to have a few more. We've got a few holes. We'd take as many as we can get. But those are groups of ranchers that work together who figure out what the concerns are in their area. In a state as big as Texas, obviously the resource concerns in El Paso are different than they are in Athens.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so they work together and figure out what their resource concerns are, what outreach, what education, what things they can do to encourage good stewardship. It's a peer-to-peer learning model, and the ranchers seem to really like that. It's we respect and work a lot with Texas A&M AgriLife, Texas Tech, Texas Christian University, all of them. But there's nothing like one rancher saying, or leading tours or having workshops on their property for other ranchers. And, and they look around, and you may not want to do exactly what they do. You may not want to graze like they graze, but you'll probably find something that applies.
That's great. So you're executive director.
am.
You have a staff.
We have contractors that help us. We have several technical assistant specialists, and I've got, thank goodness, a bookkeeper and an admin that can deal with all the government stuff
good. Yeah,
associated with having USDA agreements and grants.
That sounds fabulous. So you mentioned several things, events. Some of them are training events. Some of them are like little workshops. But then you're also doing, you were saying, like one-on-one consultations.
Yes, we have just started more targeted technical assistance. We have 2 contractors engaged to work on that. They are both former NRCS. They were NRCS grazing specialists. There are 10 of those positions across Texas that some work very closely with GLC.
Yeah.
But yes, we just started that. We have an agreement that began October 1st at the beginning of the federal fiscal year. And that's when we kind of redesigned our outreach a little bit. We have an agreement and a grant working side by side. And the grant is specifically principles before practices, but the outreach was designed and the technical assistance to address what we see as ranchers seeking cost share programs, EQIP, CSP, whatever, and the lack of technical assistance available from NRCS. They're stuck to their computers having to do that end of it.
Right.
And so people are not getting long-term planning, long-term management plans. It's more like walking into an office and say, hey, I'd like a water facility and I'd like a fence. Well, what's our goal here? What soil health principles, what grazing management principles, what are we trying to improve? Is this the best way to do this? What are we going to do afterwards? How are we going to maintain these?
I love it. I want to really come back and zero in a little bit on this new funded program, but first I want to ask you about the peer-to-peer learning and barriers to adoption, for practices that improve everything, that improve the land productivity and soil health practices that also then improve bottom line, for the rancher. You're seeing, I'm just kind of coming back and checking, this peer-to-peer seems to really be helping get through some of the barriers to adoption to some of these new practices. You see that working?
I do see that working. I'm going to be honest with you and tell you, I think one of the biggest barriers is we'd all like to see rotational grazing. The more intense, the better, right? That's what we know it works. We see improvement on the property for doing that.
Yeah.
But I think one of the biggest barriers to getting more of that sort of thing adopted across the state is when you present to a landowner who's got a few pastures maybe, or maybe just one. I remember sitting at I'll give you an example, sitting at Texas Wildlife Association, and someone gave a presentation on grazing, and he stood there and he said, you've got to have at least 16 pastures, and it's better if you have 40. Well, that room was full of doctors and lawyers and whatnot that buy land, chiefly in your part of the world, Peggy, in Hill Country or
Right.
South Texas, to hunt on. And they might have 1 or 2 pastures and it's leased out. They're not there very often. Maybe they're there once a week. And they just turn off. I mean, you just saw the whole room. They're like, well, I can't do this.
Yeah.
Okay, the next speaker was a rancher who stood up and said, you don't have to have 16 pastures. You don't have to have 40. Start where you're at.
Yeah.
If you have 1 pasture and there's 2 water sources, turn a water source off. If you have 2 pastures, put all your livestock in one of those.
Yeah.
Start where you're at and work from there. And we get a lot more people thinking, okay, I can try this. I can work that way. It's too often presented as an all or nothing.
Right.
And a lot of people just think I can't do that.
Right. So I like that. I think if we can get them started, like you said, then they'll start learning. They'll open up some mind and observation and start learning, and they'll find that everything, ultimately, if they progress, right, they'll find that everything gets better and better and better as they can allow for, with more paddocks and more recovery time. So that's great. That's great. We've got to figure out how to get the message out in a way that's receivable. There's no question. So tell us more about this principles before practice. program. I'm really excited to hear more about it. And how are you delivering that program now to the ranchers here in Texas?
Well, on a statewide basis, we're doing a lot of outreach. We've got our technical assistant specialists working, just making that the theme of everything that we're doing right now. On a smaller basis, we're really excited about a grant that we have with USDA that involves 3 resource teams. NRCS is organized into multi-county resource teams.
Okay.
3, 4, 5, 6 counties apiece.
Yes.
And it involves 3 of those teams. And we're going to do workshops this spring in outside of San Antonio, in the Laredo team and the San Angelo team.
Great.
And producers who come to those workshops, where we will talk about soil health principles and grazing management principles, not just presentations, but then we'll be outside too, digging holes, and they will receive a certificate that will give them a bump in the EQIP scoring process.
Oh,
Almost like CEUs for, we all
Yeah.
have to get CEUs for, say, a pesticide applicator license or different things like that.
right.
That's a pilot project across Texas. So we have to be careful because there are 16 counties involved in those 3 resource teams, and we have 238 other counties in Texas that are not
Right.
involved in the pilot project. The second part of that pilot project is we're going to present that information via webinar. And if a producer completes the webinar, they get the same kind of a certificate. We're going to see what sort of adoption we have.
Yeah.
And it's only a 2-year project. So we're hoping that we can follow up with a little grant then to follow and see if the practices that were adopted by those producers have a more lasting effect.
Right.
And if we can survey and talk to those producers, say 5 years down the road or whatever. So we're kind of doing the same workshops across the state, but in that targeted area, they're trying, and it's an incentive program basically.
Right.
And to our knowledge, that's never been done anywhere in the United States.
Well, that's going to be really interesting and fun to see. It never hurts to have some kind of beneficial incentive, and then to be able to follow up. Of course, I hope to see what really changes. Tell us a little bit more about what you mean about getting ranchers to understand the principles before they go out and practice. Help us understand. Maybe give us an example or 2.
So I spoke 2 days ago in College Station at a program called Battleground to Breaking Ground.
Yes, I know that program.
Okay. And I spoke to a group of veterans, and they're novice landowners, mostly very novice landowners, just explaining things like what's happening on the bare ground. If we don't have our soil covered, what's happening with the temperature of the soil, how that's killing the bacteria underground, how we need that bacteria and fungi because it provides the glue that holds the soil structure together.
Right.
And we looked at aggregates of soil and how we need that structure in the soil. It's just real hands-on basic stuff. And then you say, okay, now you translate that into your management. You don't want to leave bare ground. Continuous grazing often leaves too much bare ground.
Yeah.
And this is what you're doing. And
Right.
it's just, it's simple concepts, but you just help people put it all together. It's not unusual for the soil surface temperature to reach 140 degrees in the summer, especially in West and South Texas, or the hill country where the soils are light colored. McDonald's cooks their hamburgers to 140 degrees for a very specific reason, to kill the bacteria.
Right, exactly.
And that's what we're doing to our soils. And when you just put concepts before people with those kind of examples, it resonates with them. It means something. I think too often our scientific community talks over people's heads. I had a visual on Facebook last fall, I guess, and it's the 2 cylinders of water with a soil aggregate in the top of each one. One's a no-till, you've seen that.
I've seen that. I've actually done that too. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I did it. Part of my graduate research was doing that. The actual scientific way of doing it. We use that example all the time. But I had people commenting, "Oh, good, that's great," and everything. And then one guy, and I don't know if Darron's still on here, but he was in the Victoria area, actually, this guy. He got on there and he said, how come the no-till aggregate is floating and not absorbing water. We didn't explain what was going on. So then I put it together, a whole explanation that aggregate was saturated and that water was available for the plant to use, whereas the other one dissolved and probably clogged up the pores and you couldn't get water down into the soil profile. And then there was a follow-up question from somebody else. And they said, is that why we have to aerate our Bermuda grass pastures? Because they won't absorb water.
Yeah.
And I said, well, yes. And, yes and no, in a way. Your pasture probably has poor soil structure because it's a monoculture and it's, been treated a lot with fertilizers and whatnot. But anyway, that made me realize that we need to take the simplest of principles and explain them in a meaningful fashion. And it's not that you're talking down to people. They don't care what the standard deviation was or how many treatments there were or the charts and the graphs that we put together. Simple things resonate with people.
No, that's a great example and a great point. As someone who's been both an educator but also a producer, there sometimes has been a big gap between the research and the research results and real application out on an actual property, out on the actual ranch. So what you're doing from my producer perspective, is that you're making it where it really makes sense. You're presenting it so it makes sense, making it applicable and giving them some, concrete idea of how they use this information on their own in their own operation. So
I'm as guilty as anybody, Peggy. I did research. I came to Texas to go to graduate school at Texas A&M, and I had a great grazing research project at Throckmorton, one of the very first ones that looked at infiltration and all the soil structure and stuff on intensive grazing.
Right.
And then they were very prescribed. You moved X.
Yeah.
There wasn't a lot of observation involved, but it was very early.
Right.
On an aggregate stability was one of the things we looked at. And I wrote a couple of journal articles and I did all the things I had to do. My thesis is in the bookshelf over here.
Yeah.
But I don't know that I could have, when I finished that grad program, explained to one single human being what I just explained to you about that clod of dirt and the bacteria and the structure and how it all worked and everything. And we're not getting the information to people. And I don't want people to think you're talking down to them. You're just making it meaningful.
Right. No, I get it. As an educator, I get it. Right. So
I think that's why things like HMI and ranching for profit and some of that stuff have flourished.
Yeah.
Because they're bringing it in a meaningful fashion to people.
Right. So that it makes sense to them. Yeah. So I love this. And so you've got this grant, you've got these 3 regions in Texas. You're going to launch this program, and you have 2 years where you'll be doing workshops and some follow-up with the hope that you'll do follow-up just beyond those 2 years, so you can really see what kind of changes took place. That's really going to be helpful. So that information will be available to us, the general public, and to your partners and to other organizations like NCAT working in the same arena.
Yes.
That's going to really, really be helpful. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing on these ranches you help manage, the Taylor Ranch.
I've worked with Taylor Ranches for 28 years.
Okay.
And there are 3 large ranches up here. The ownership is in Wichita Falls. I'm a living, breathing example of start where you're at. Start rotational grazing, start doing things with the pastures you have, with the water you have, figuring out where your limiting factors are, what things you can do to add or change or make it work. And they're very different ranches, the 3 of them. There's one in Gray County, south of Pampa, one in the central panhandle near Dumas, and one in the far western, nearly in New Mexico. So they're very different. We have a lesser prairie chicken habitat conservation program on the one in Gray County, and they won't let us graze intensively.
Oh.
We need to. We need to. I have a ranch with too much grass, way too much grass.
Yeah.
And so we're working with them on how to do that. But they're big pastures and stuff. So, you start talking about dividing them up and everything, and it's overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
Water's the limiting factor on my ranch in Moore County, and the ranch in Hartley County, we're getting some good work done on. It was abused for many years, continuously grazed way too heavily, and we're getting some good work done with rotation with the pastures that we have.
Yeah.
We did just purchase a trailer. I guess I can say what it is, razor grazer.
Okay,
And
sure.
yeah, it's a so we can string out 2 miles of fence and subdivide the pastures we have and move that little trailer thing
Yeah.
then without having to put up a lot of fence.
Right.
So I guess it's like having 3 experiments going on all at once. It's pretty fun.
Yeah. No, it sounds like it. Yeah, and trying out some stuff. So does that information get disseminated too?
No, not really.
Okay.
I mean, it's private. The family's pretty quiet about it, and
Yeah.
I talk about it, and I keep telling myself I need to make more posts on the Texas GLC Facebook page about some of what I'm seeing, and just not. I do a lot of posts, and I don't say where I'm at.
Yeah.
Just to protect people's
Well, sure.
privacy and stuff, and I could do more of that probably.
Yeah. So,
But yeah, we talk about it. I mean, in our groups and stuff.
Don't have time to stay up to date on the freshest sustainable agriculture news, events, and funding opportunities? You can trust NCAT to keep you connected with our weekly harvest e-newsletter. Subscribe today at ncat.org and get your weekly harvest delivered each Wednesday.
talk a little bit about, you saying when you did your research at Throckmorton, it was a place where they were doing kind of a prescribed grazing program. So talk about that as opposed to some people call adaptive management, and why adaptive management might be pretty important at this time with our crazy climate.
Oh, absolutely. So those were grazing treatments. It was 11 sections that was known as the Texas Experimental Ranch.
Okay.
And it was a collaboration of, it wasn't AgriLife at that time, but it was research, A&M Research and Extension.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And we had continuous grazing. We had exposures that were never grazed. We had the old Merrill 4-pasture 3-herd system.
Yeah.
And then we had some more intensive systems, 2 of them, the old wagon wheel variety. Right. But it was you moved them every 2 days, or, it was a 42 pasture and then a 24 pasture system. But it was very prescribed. There was no going out and looking and saying, have we,
we need to slow down.
Have we grazed too much or anything? There was no adaptivity at all. You just did it that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we looked at the infiltration rates, the vegetation community. We looked at, the amount of vegetation before and after grazing, or during, continuous or, all the treatments before and after grazing. We looked at the diversity of the plant community. We dug holes. We did bulk density. We did aggregate stability. We did soil textures. We tried to stay on one soil with all the research. I mean, we got a lot of good data. And I was just last year, I told one of the professors on my committee, and I'll see him next week, and I'm going to tell him again, I think we need to dig that data up and apply it in a more meaningful fashion for people. But now you see a lot more adaptive stuff. In Hartley County, I work very closely with the lessee, and we're going out and looking at the pastures, and we're in about a 2 to 3 week. We move after that, and we're going out and looking, is it time to move? What are we doing here? I do a lot of forage inventories straight out of my side-by-side, but it's more, we've got all these names for all this grazing stuff. It kind of cracks me up over the years.
Yeah.
Adaptive and
right.
targeted and
planned
this, that,
and managed and grazing, and all these different terms. Right.
And they all have to do with observation.
Yeah, that's the bottom line, right?
Well, yeah, you got to teach people what they're observing, though.
Well, that was my next question. What are some of the main primary key indicators that you like to teach them to look at?
The very biggest question we get, whether we're at a trade show or out on a ranch or it gets texted to me or anything, is what plant is this? And what good is it?
Yeah.
And we've had trouble getting grant funding to do plant ID stuff.
Wow.
And they're like, well, that's too basic. And I'm like, but that's what people want to know.
Yeah.
And that's where they have to start. The ranch in Hartley County had a lot of sand drop seed on it, has a lot of sand drop seed on it. And a former lessee was trying to tell me, he said, look at all that grass out there. And I said, great, nothing eats it.
Yeah.
I mean, you could put 100 of them in an acre and I'm not sure they'd eat it, and so that's probably the biggest question that we get and the biggest
Mhm.
thirst for knowledge. I've been in presentations where another one that comes to mind was at Texas Wildlife Association probably 5 years ago. And it was a fascinating presentation on the use of drones and technology and looking at where your cattle, their patterns in the pasture and what they're doing. And again, novice landowner base at that function. And one gentleman raised his hand. He goes, this is really cool what you're doing. But he said, I don't even know what grows in my pastures.
Mhm.
And so the next year we went and we did a plant ID workshop there and had a ton of interest.
Yeah.
So that's kind of fun to do
Yeah,
that.
that sounds like yeah, some general and easy, simple education of what are the primary, forages for each site, like for each region, because it's going to be different all over the state, like you
Yeah,
said.
I give away mounted plant sets. A
Uh-huh.
lot of times when we're doing talks in different parts of the state or different outreach events,
Uh-huh.
and it might be 20 plants, and I call it the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah.
If you know 20 plants on your ranch, no matter where you're at, you're 20 times ahead of most everybody else.
Yeah.
But you need to know the really good ones, you need to know the really bad ones, and you need to know the ones that could give you trouble.
Yeah. And so
And
some other things like you were saying earlier, bare ground, that's obviously an indicator, that
Mhm.
people need to watch for. Is that increasing or decreasing, with your management? That would be one. And I guess there's a lot of different things you can look at as signs for erosion, signs that erosion is going on, and even the timing of the recovery, so those kinds of, different kinds of indicators, to pay attention to help you decide, help you make those decisions you're talking about. Do I move now? Do I move faster? Do I move slower? So you advocate ranchers coming up with a general plan and then monitoring in some form or fashion to adapt to what's going on with weather and rainfall and temperature and all that.
Well, yes, I have a quote that I use. I have a couple of quotes that I use. One of them comes from my good friend Frank Price in Sterling City, Texas, and he says, "The better it gets, the faster it gets better."
Yes.
Just to
So
get people
meaning
kind of
the land,
motivated to
yes.
get started.
Yeah.
I want to put that on a t-shirt. And every time I write an article or anything about grazing management, I end it with, if grazing management was easy, they'd call it rocket science. Rocket science is math.
I like
We don't
that.
have the same conditions as our neighbor, as we had last week, as we had last year.
Exactly.
It's always different.
Yeah.
I'm not sure about you in the work that you do with producers. The most common thing I hear from people, and I want to do several grazing tours in Texas and name them this, and it's that won't work here.
Yes. Yes. I couldn't count how many times I've heard that. Yes.
Oh yeah, I've written articles about that. It's that won't work here. My ranch is too large. My ranch is too small. It doesn't rain enough. It rains too much, And so I would like to do that won't work here grazing tour in several regions in Texas.
That would be fun. Yeah, that would be great. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about kind of your background. How did you get into this? And why is this so important to you?
I grew up in Montana. We had family ranch in southeastern Montana, which I have just sold. Had one in Wyoming, and that's where I wanted to be all the time.
Right.
The house I grew up in Billings, Montana, had a fireplace with big rocks out in front of it, big flat rocks and grout and stuff. And I rotated pastures there. I'm 59 years ago, at 5 years old, I was the grout, the flat rocks were my different pastures, and I'd put my plastic animals over here or over there or whatever, and had my headquarters and my roads and everything.
That's hilarious. Yeah.
But I went to college in Montana State and majored in range management. My husband has an ag economics degree. He works with livestock marketing, futures markets.
Okay.
And his family nearly lost the ranch because they were doing a great job at production and a poor job at marketing. So he had a passion for that. When we
Right.
finished college, there weren't any jobs
Yeah.
in the early 80s in Montana. So we came to Texas to graduate school.
Okay.
And I'm really glad I did. I think it really opened my perspective. I understand how research works. And now I think I understand how to take some of that information and make it meaningful to producers.
Yeah. That's
Because
great.
we need all that research. There's lots of outstanding research going on.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't seem to get filtered down to us
Right.
always in
Right.
a meaningful fashion.
No, I agree with that too. Yeah. That sounds great. And so you're really dedicated to this. I guess you're going to stay here in Texas for a while.
Well, I
don't-
guess so. I've been here 40 years, so
Yeah.
we were going to go back right away. And the opportunities that were presented to us in Texas were too good to pass up. And then I thought, well, we'll go back. We'll go back before we have kids. We won't have kids in Texas. I have 3 of them, 3 grown-up kids
Yeah.
in Texas.
Yeah. They live here now. This is home to them now. I know how that works.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
So now tell us a little bit about, I have a couple more questions left. The first one is, how do people find you? How do they find information about Texas Grazing Land Coalition, where on social media and that kind of thing? And if they're interested, if they want to get more information, let's let them know how they find the organization.
Okay, we have a great website. It's Texas, TEXASGLC.org.
Okay. .org, everybody.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think we own .com too. I think that gets you there too.
Okay.
But we have a great website. It's got contact information for not only our contractors and the people that work with us. It has contact information for the NRCS specialists across the state. We've got a newsletter once a month that we've had that a year now, because we've been a one-woman operation for 8 years.
Oh,
So,
wow. Oh, wow.
So
you're
at any
really
rate,
going. Uh-huh.
we have a newsletter, and interestingly enough, in that newsletter, I do a feature on a plant every month. The answer is always no. Know your plants. And that is what we get the most commentary on.
Okay.
That is what I get the most questions, the most feedback. But anyway, you can find us there. And we also, we started off with social media and several different platforms, but we have the most traffic and interaction on Facebook.
Okay.
Texas Grazing Land Coalition. And we get some good conversations going there.
Is that TXGLC on Facebook?
Yes.
Not
Yeah.
spelled out, just TX.
No, it's spelled out. It's spelled out on Facebook.
It is TEXA.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, TEXA, Texas Grazing Land Coalition.
Okay, on Facebook. Great. So everybody can go.
But when our acronym logo, all that stuff is TX. As soon as you put the X next to the T, everybody knows it's Texas. If you just do T, they're not sure if it's Tennessee or if it's or what it is,
So on these 3 regions where you're going to be doing this principles before practice, I love that idea. I'm eager to see how that goes. Now, can people sign up for that, or how are you going to be marketing and filling those workshops?
Well, we have just gotten the language that NRCS is letting us use they're a little concerned, and it is going to be confusing to people in other counties because they're not going to be eligible for the incentive. Right. So we've got some save the dates that'll be coming out. Our South Texas one, I believe, and I wish I had them in front of me. Our South Texas one is April 3rd. Okay. And there's another one in April and one in early May. Okay. And those will be all over our media, and we will be working with, I'll probably let you know, Hill Country Alliance, the Battleground to Breaking Ground people have regional chapters like in the San Antonio area, because we kind of targeted the veteran audience there. Okay. Anyone can go to these things, but the only people eligible for the EQIP funding thing are in those counties.
I got it. Okay.
EQIP has county-based funds, and it has state pools of money that they operate from. Most of it is county-based, but we couldn't obviously offer an opportunity in some counties and then apply it to state-based funding when other people didn't have access to that. So every producer that we talked to about this, they're like, man, this is great. He said, they're always telling us, I hate seeing people get money for fences and things, and then the gates are open, or, they're not using the practices to advance the principles, to improve the principles. Right. And they, amongst producers, they think it would be a great idea if all that funding was tied to CEUs, I guess. I would love to see something like that. And I think, Peggy, I don't know if you're familiar with the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef.
Not very. I have heard of it. Yeah.
Well, that's corporations and whatnot,
Right.
and that they've gotten their influence on beef quality assurance and training people to work better with the land, and companies like Walmart paying a premium for animals that are raised in a certain way. And I think that we are right at the tipping point of interest from the corporate world and the consumers in recognizing good land stewards and paying for that. Obviously they are for various ecosystem services. We talk about carbon markets, all that kind of stuff. But I could envision some kind of a certification system, or if you're participating in trainings, you can say, hey, I don't know what the word would be for it, but we're grazing quality assurance or whatever, and people getting just rewarded for doing a good job.
Yeah, potentially, that's a prospect on the horizon for sure, with the carbon markets in particular. So we'll see how that goes. But these would be great in both incentives, but also recognition of what is really good land management, and that land management is good for the producer, but the rest of society as well. So getting that message out is a challenge. Let me ask you one last thing, and that is, here in Texas, well, all over the country, there's crazy weather, but here in Texas, we've had areas, I happen to live in one of them, that have had severe drought, and our El Nino did not bring us very much rain. And now meteorologists are saying we're shifting back to La Nina, which, purportedly means more drought. So what message would you want our Texas ranchers to be, to hear, and what do you want them to be thinking about if some of us are just still going to be in this drought cycle?
Anything we can do to create healthy, resilient ecosystems gets us through all these climate changes.
Right.
When I was in college, the next ice age was doomed. It was impending, I mean, the climate is going to continue to change up, down, around, whatever. Healthy, resilient ecosystems can get you through this.
Right.
It's possible to have your neighbors having a huge drought and you're not.
Yeah.
Because of the way you've taken care of your ecosystem. And there's just anything you can do to make your ecosystem more resilient.
So I'm going to remind producers listening, go to one of, the Texas GLC workshops to really find out how to build that resiliency. Yeah.
Absolutely. We'd love to have them all.
Thank you so much, Jenny. Appreciate it. Enjoyed it very much. Appreciate it. You're giving us some time, and we'll turn it back to Darron.
Yeah, thank you, Jenny and Peggy. I think we found out a lot of what y'all are working on today, and I think we share a lot of commonality there. And I'm excited to have finally met you, and hopefully we can work together more in the future.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed it a lot, and I would love to be involved in your working groups or get you hooked up with some of our folks that are down in the hill country.
That's great. We love it.
That's it for this episode. Thanks for listening. Additional information about this episode and related resources can be found at atra.ncat.org. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe to Voices from the Field wherever you get your podcasts. I'm your host, Rich Myers. ATRA, Voices from the Field, is produced by the National Center for Appropriate Technology, headquartered in Butte, Montana. It's supported by the USDA Rural Business Cooperative Service as part of NCAT's ATRA Sustainable Agriculture Program. Any opinions, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this recording are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of the USDA or NCAT. We'll catch you again next week, and until then, keep on farming.